It's great to see that there is a considerable interest in this town in discussing the issues that Andrea has just pointed out. And let me also say from my side what a great honor it is to make a couple of personal remarks this morning in the presence of Tawakkol Kaman, the Nobel Peace Prize laureate. Tawakkol, you have been and you are a great champion for democracy, peace, and also women's rights, not just in your country, but all over the world. You're truly a courageous and a very remarkable woman, and an inspiration, I guess, for many of us sitting here in the room, but far, far across as well. Not only for women, but also for men. So I very much like to thank you and your husband to taking the time to come to Brussels in order to honor us with your presence, and we are looking forward to hearing from you in a couple of minutes. I would also like to say special words of appreciation to Andrea, to Elizabeth, and the entire team from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. NATO, the organization that I do represent, indeed appreciates a lot what the Konrad Adenauer Foundation does in engaging civil societies basically across the world. In many countries you are present, including in the Middle East, in North Africa, and also in some of the Gulf countries. And we, as I said, do highly appreciate your many civic educational initiatives, your conferences, your events, including this one, all of them very much aimed at promoting democratic liberties, participation, the consolidation of democracies, development, and ultimately also transatlantic relations. The objective of this gathering is relatively clear, at least to us, because we invited colleagues from across the region, from North Africa and the Middle East, to raise awareness, to make their points about the needs of women in these very important political processes that we have seen and that are labeled the Arab Spring. Personally, I'm not really too happy with that term Arab Spring. I think I'd rather refer to it as Arab Awakening. But however you want to label the developments that we've seen ever since January last year, they are very important political developments, and they have spread not only across the Mediterranean, but also far into the Gulf countries. People demand more democracy and participation. And I think these changes that we have seen, and they are still taking place, they are very much driven by social, economic, and ultimately, as I said, also political demands. And at the same time, and because of the fact that they are driven by political, social, and economic demands and requests, they are very much a matter of the domestic policies of the respective countries. But I think the Arab Spring, the Arab Awakening, has made one thing clear, at least for me. People in that part of the world, in particular the majority of them below 40, the so-called .com generation in your countries, they want a perspective for their life. They want jobs, they want education, they want political participation, they want access to markets. And many of them also want civil liberties and political freedom. They don't want old recipes and old agendas to address the problems of their future. And they don't want political rhetoric, but effective political and economic performance. But all this is easier said than done, because many countries still need to develop a culture of freedom, of togetherness, of democracy. But what I think is very important for these processes as they move along is that they must be inclusive. They must take into account as many voices, as many opinions of people living in these countries as possible, including, obviously, the views of women. All this will not come overnight. Perhaps it will take generations in order to create institutions that can sustain political change. And ultimately, also it will be the people of the Mediterranean countries, the North African countries, and also in the borderway, the Arab world, that will decide on their own futures. I don't think it's up for an organization like NATO or up for other international organizations to tell you how you should shape your future. But what we can do, we can be there to assist you. And we at NATO, we do indeed have perhaps some experience that we can offer to the countries involved in terms of helping them to not only get their reforms going, but also sustain some of the reforms. Indeed, NATO has quite a track record when it comes to advising and counseling partner nations, primarily in the domain of security and defense sector reform of the military. But that's only one opportunity. Another opportunity, I guess, is to involve these countries of the regions in our already existing political consultation and cooperation mechanism. And many of you may be familiar with the fact that indeed we do already have, for a number of years, very effective frameworks in place that allow us to work with the countries in our immediate neighborhood. The Mediterranean Dialogue Program, as well as the Istanbul Cooperative Initiative, are just two of them. And they were not only very helpful in terms of creating better mutual understanding between NATO member countries and the countries on the other side of the equation concerned, but also to work very practically on a number of security and defense-related issues. Ultimately, a number of these countries also chose to help us in operating our more recently operation that we did in support of Libya. And let me just make a couple of very quick remarks about the Libyan crisis that we've all seen evolving last summer and in the autumn, because it made very clear for us, for NATO, that our security can be indeed very much and directly affected by developments in our southern neighborhood. We think that NATO has been successful in fulfilling the mandate that has been given to us by the United Nations Security Council, and that was to protect the people of Libya. We did our very best to protect the people of Libya, and I think we have at least contributed to saving lives there. We have undertaken, meanwhile, our own lessons learned. What did we do well, and what did we do perhaps not too well in conducting this operation, which is called Unified Protector. But looking back at ourselves, we think that we indeed took a very quick decision in support of fulfilling these mandates that were given to us by the United Nations Security Council resolution, and also involving very quickly partners from the region. As we look at the situation right now, NATO stands ready to also continue working with the Libyan transitional government, with the Libyan people, in order to help fostering that transitioning process. And we remain open to also provide assistance in the realm of the security and sector reform, the military reform, but ultimately also, if wanted by Libya and if wanted by the countries represented in this room here, also on 1325. Interestingly, and we discussed that a little bit yesterday, 1325, that very important resolution on women, peace and security, has never been addressed by the countries that work with us, with NATO, in the framework of the Mediterranean Dialogue and the Istanbul Cooperative Initiative. And perhaps it's time for the governments and for you, representing the civil societies in these countries, to put this on the table. Because 1325 gives us a very good framework to help nations very actively and very concretely to prepare their own armed forces in terms of protecting women and children, but also more broadly speaking, mainstreaming gender perspectives into everything that relates to women's role in peace and security. Let me just add by making a final note on what we've done and are still undertaking in support of implementing the United Nations Security Council resolution in Afghanistan. We are not here to discuss the situation in Afghanistan, and obviously this is a very unique situation that also differs in many, many ways from the situation in the countries in the Arab world. But what we have done, and I think this is a good lessons learned that we will perhaps discuss in the course of the day, is to really put a lot of emphasis in training our own troops before they deploy into theater, make them aware about gender-related sensitivities and the needs, deploy gender experts and gender field advisors side by side with their military colleagues in uniform, and by doing so, establishing a very concrete line of communication and of practical consultation and cooperation with the Afghan women. I'm not saying it's all rosy-posy, that we have achieved everything that we wanted to achieve, but what I'm saying is that we have at least started to make a difference in Afghanistan by implementing 1325 across the board of our member countries and a number of partner countries. And perhaps that experience can help us to also work along those lines with the countries in the Arab world and in Northern Africa. I would like to stop here because I guess the overall focus and the interest of all of us sitting in this room is not on my remarks, but on your remarks, Tavakol. So I would very much like to introduce you with a couple of short words, which are almost not needed because you have been in the media, you have been in the press ever since you have been awarded that wonderful Nobel Peace Prize. And looking back at the quote-unquote laureates, the winners of the Nobel Peace Prize, ever since it was created in 1902, there haven't been really too many women that have been awarded that Peace Prize. But you are the ones, and you have made us extremely proud for having fought so courageously the cause of the Arab youth in your country, together with your husband, together with your followers, together with your collaborators. So we would very much like to hear your vision of how you would like to see your country and the broader Arab region being developed and what we can do in order to assist you. Tavakol, if you'd like, I offer you my place here and you have the floor.